For a while now, people have been debating the legitimacy of a hot dog as a sandwich. My typical response when this subject's brought up is, it's okay to have an opinion, it's also okay to be wrong. I say this because I don't usually have the time to explain to them all of the steps of reasoning that will allow them to reach an enlightened state and accept the veracity of the hot dog sandwich. Sometimes I do, however, and most of these times sandwich heretics will refuse to change their ways and ignore almost every point I've made. This is why I've decided to compile all of my evidence and truths into this video. Now, in order to understand the radical sandwich theories that we'll be discussing in the later portions of this video, we first need to comprehend the basics of sandwich theory. When the hot dog sandwich argument first broke out on the internet, someone out there had the great idea to put together this sandwich alignment chart. I'm going to spend some time reviewing this chart for the benefit of those of you who have not seen it. This chart is an adaptation of a character alignment chart commonly used in role-playing video games. It's essentially a table read like a Venn diagram or a multiplication grid. Each box within the table represents what happens when you combine both the labels found on the outside. In this chart, a sandwich is simplified into two compounds. We have the ingredients and the structure. Each of these two components is then further broken down into three categories: purist, neutral, and rebel. Starting with the left side of the table, we see the structure purist, who believes a sandwich must have a classic sandwich shape, that is, two pieces of bread with toppings in between them. This is your everyday turkey clubs, BLTs, things like that. The next would be structure neutral, who says the containers must be on either side of the toppings, but not necessarily in two separate pieces. This is where you'll see submarine sandwiches and cheesesteaks. The structure rebel believes that it can contain any food enveloped in any way by a containing food. This is things like wraps and burritos. Going along the top, we have the ingredient purist, who believes that sandwiches must contain classic sandwich toppings like deli meats, cheeses, lettuce, condiments, things like that. This is followed by the ingredient neutral, who believes that it can contain a broader scope of savory ingredients, such as beans, maybe rice, that sort of thing. This is followed by the ingredient rebel, who believes that it can contain literally any food products sandwiched together. These are things like ice cream sandwiches and even Pop-Tarts. When you consider all of these things together, you can see that the hot dog being a sandwich really isn't a radical idea. It's not even that far out there in terms of how far we can go with sandwich theory. So now that we have a basic understanding of sandwich theory, I'm going to discuss the government's take on all this. A common topic brought up in this debate is the opinion of the government. A lot of people seem to care about what the law declares a sandwich as, and that's reasonable. I mean, after all, nobody knows the art of semantics like a lawyer. The problem with this, though, is that the government is very capable of being wrong. That's something I'm sure everyone can agree on, no matter where you fall on the political spectrum. This is, unfortunately, one of those cases. In America, we have a department of government dedicated entirely to the operation of foodstuffs. This department is called the United States Department of Agriculture. Surely, if anyone can settle this debate, it must be them, right? Well, in 2005, the USDA published a Food Standards and Labeling Policy book. In this book, they outline the criteria an item must meet to be labeled as a specific food. Looking in this book, we can see that they have provided a listing for sandwiches. For a closed sandwich, it reads that it must contain 35% cooked meat and no more than 50% bread. For an open-faced sandwich, which is something we will be discussing later, it must contain 50% meat. Finally, the last thing of note in this section is right at the end. It says dinners containing a sandwich-type product, example given a Frankenfurter, hamburger, or sliced poultry meat with a bun, are amenable and subject to inspection. Now, what we can gather from this is that the people at the USDA simply have no joy in their lives. They're on the right track by suggesting a Frankenfurter could be a sandwich-type product, but to say that a sandwich is only a sandwich if it contains meat is just a vile take. Have these people never heard of a PB&J, a grilled cheese? Are these not sandwiches? What about vegetarians? This policy book clearly has been dated and is in dire need of an update. We'll find no reasonable answers here. Alright, well, if there's one thing I know about the world we live in, it's this. If it exists, it can be taxed. So let's go look at some tax codes and see if we can find any enlightenment there. A more recent bulletin posting on the state of New York's Department of Taxation and Finance seems promising. Posted on April 8, 2019, the bulletin serves to define what a sandwich is for tax purposes. In it, we can see that the state of New York is very liberal and enlightened to the idea of sandwiches. They include the almighty PB&J as well as just about everything else with some component of a carbohydrate. We're talking wraps, heroes, burritos, and in fact hot dogs. This is looking promising. Maybe we're wrong about the government. Then again, maybe not. Looking for a legal precedent has let us down. In 2006, a case went to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Superior Court regarding the opening of a Qdoba in a mall where Panera Bread already existed. Panera sued the mall for violating a contract they had signed stating that they wouldn't allow another sandwich shop to open up in their storefronts. The lease they signed had no definition for what a sandwich was, a fatal error, and because of this, the court had to use Merriam-Webster's 2002 definition of a sandwich, which is another catastrophic mistake. This, at the time, was defined as two thin pieces of bread, usually buttered, with a thin layer as of meat, cheese, or savory mixture spread in between them. Ultimately, it was ruled that burritos, tacos, and quesadillas are not sandwiches. This completely removes the idea of an open-faced sandwich and suggests that hot dogs are not sandwiches, something we will look into later. Looking up the full definition today, they seem to have made it better, but still not perfect. Two or more slices of bread or a split roll having a filling in between them, or one slice of bread covered with food, or something resembling a sandwich. While this definition does now include open-faced sandwiches and indeed hot dogs, it still discriminates on the basis that bread must be included. In my opinion, the second part of this definition, while certainly hardly a definition at all, is much more inclusive of sandwiches. Now, from these three sources, we can begin to conclude a few things. The first thing is that the government hasn't completely sorted all of this out yet. It's still very much ongoing. The second thing that we can conclude is that the sandwich enlightenment has already begun to occur. In 2005 and 2006, people were very traditionalist in their sandwich views, but somewhere along the way, we've transitioned into a more reasonable definition. Looking at the current Merriam-Webster definition, the 2015 New York Tax Code, and the USDA policy book, we can see how the question of a hot dog being a sandwich is just silly. The real question is about burritos, tacos, quesadillas, wraps, things like that. Nevertheless, we will begin our discussion on the hot dog sandwich. A lot of people these days are so closed-minded about the idea of sandwiches. What they don't realize is that the word sandwich is more of an umbrella term. There are many things that fall under that umbrella and qualify as a sandwich. One of the things that I see people struggle with the most when confronting this concept is that under the umbrella there are subtypes of sandwiches that are still sandwiches, but they may not look like other sandwiches that they know. It's easiest to think of this as an evolutionary tree or a family tree. There are many species that belong to the order primate: humans, apes, gorillas, chimps, orangutans, and they're all similar, but they're not the same to each other. They're divided and split and divided even further into families, genuses, species, but that doesn't mean that they're not primates. Throughout this video, we will be filling out our own sandwich umbrella to keep track of the topics we're discussing and to help us define and understand where all of those things fit. Now, the first item that we're going to be looking at is the source of the most controversial topic in sandwich theory we've had since sliced bread. This singular question, if brought up at your next Thanksgiving, is enough to stop all of your relatives from getting into politics for the entire day. This does not mean that the debate will be any less calm and reasonable, so use this knowledge carefully. The question is a hot dog a sandwich? It's a very simple question with a very simple answer, and we've already partially discussed it, yes. Of all the sandwiches we'll be discussing, this one has the most straightforward answer. It's sort of the starting point to get people into sandwich theory. If you are a heathen, you'll be shaking your head. Whenever I meet one of these people, I'll always ask them why a hot dog isn't a sandwich, and the most typical reply that I get is that the bread is in one connected piece rather than two slabs of bread. This is such a silly argument, and it's easily defeated by the Merriam-Webster definition, as well as the USDA policy book and the New York Tax Code. Regardless, let's assume that you don't trust the government. That's fair. Ask yourself, what do they sell at Subway or Jimmy John's? Sandwiches, right? Of course they do. They're sandwich shops. So let's pretend I walk into one of these establishments and order a sandwich. You'll notice the bread is not in two separate pieces, yet somehow we have no problem calling that a sandwich. Cheesesteaks are another example of this. It's a sandwich that has one connected pieces of bread, so why discriminate on the hot dog? And the entire basis of a sandwich requiring two separate pieces of bread is just ridiculous to begin with. This brings us to the first two subcategories under our sandwich umbrella: closed-face and open-face sandwiches. Closed-face sandwiches are what you're used to seeing in your mind's eye when you picture a sandwich: bread, filling, bread. An open-faced sandwich, however, is a legitimate form of sandwich, and it's recognized by the Culinary Institute of America. This sandwich consists of one piece of bread and the fillings. This next revelation I will give you seems insane to some people, but it's actually pretty rational if you think about it. A pizza is a sandwich. It is an open-faced sandwich. Think about it. You got the bread on the bottom and the fillings on the top. The pizza sandwich argument is further supported by the fact that I can take two pizza slices, invert one, and stick it right on top of the other. Now we can see that the toppings have become sandwiched between the two pieces of bread. It's just that simple. So if it's not the bread, then maybe it's the fact that the meat is in a tubular form. Well, that can't possibly be reasonable. Deli meats, like the ones that you would use for your traditional lunchtime sandwich, also start out in a tubular form. The only difference is that it's sliced before you put it on the sandwich. The meat in sandwiches can come in different formats. You can have shredded, like in pulled pork, slices, like with deli meat. You can compress ground beef into balls for a meatball sub. Heck, you can even just throw a whole chicken breast between bread. So it's just not reasonable to reject the hot dog on the basis that the meat looks like a tube. Therefore, the only logical conclusion is that a hot dog is, in fact, a sandwich. This brings us to discuss the topic of the taco. The only thing that currently stops the taco from being a sandwich, having now accepted the format of a hot dog being a sandwich, is that the encompassing food is not bread. So let's suppose we made a taco with a bun instead of a tortilla. There would be no question of its authenticity as a sandwich. It's got lettuce, tomato, cheese, meat on a split bun. This would look quite similar to a cheesesteak at this point. So why do we seem to wrongfully assume that a sandwich must contain bread? Well, what is bread? Commonly, it's thought to be baked flour, water, and yeast, and this is essentially the same as making a tortilla. A tortilla is made with just flour and oil. This tells us that a tortilla is pretty much just unleavened bread, which, as its name suggests, must be bread. Even if you don't wish to accept that, the notion that a sandwich must contain exactly bread in the first place is simply wrong. Consider the ice cream sandwich like in the alignment chart, or even Oreos, which is a sandwich cookie. Neither of these products contain actual bread, and yet I'm sure most of the population would agree that they're sandwiches. Furthermore, a sandwich always has the option of being made with lettuce instead of bread, an idea popularized recently due to the gluten-free craze and people who count calories. Consider the Jimmy John's Unwich. It's the exact same as their other sandwiches, except it uses lettuce instead of bread. An example of this can also be seen at In-N-Out, with a lettuce wrap being an option. The fillings inside are still being sandwiched by the outside, only in this case, it's just lettuce. And this theory even holds up under scrutiny of saying, but it's not a carbohydrate. I'll give you the fact that ice cream sandwiches and sandwich cookies have more carbs than lettuce does. However, allow me to introduce to you the nutritional facts of lettuce. Here you can clearly see that 100 grams of iceberg lettuce has 3 grams of carbohydrates. So the carbohydrates aren't gone, they're merely reduced. This means that we can still consider the fillings to be wrapped in a carb-like substance. It now should be very clear to you that a taco is indeed a sandwich. But what about the burrito? This is actually very similar to the taco, except one or both ends are closed and the tortilla goes all the way around the filling. Using the same logic as we did with the taco, we can conclude that should we unfold the ends of the burrito and open it up, that would make it a sandwich. Therefore, the only thing that stops this from being classified correctly is the fact that the sandwich, in this case the burrito, is enclosed. But sandwiches can be enclosed. This is perfectly fine, as the fillings are still being sandwiched, although now from all sides instead of just 2 or 3. Consider, if you will, the Monte Cristo. This sandwich is dipped in a batter and deep fried, thus completely encapsulating the filling. Or even the croquet monsieur, which is battered and grilled. Additionally, the existence of the Uncrustable is enough to put this ridiculousness to an end. Using this logic, we can now start to accept a large number of sandwiches for what they are. Heroes are essentially tacos and therefore sandwiches. Pop-Tarts are essentially small sweet burritos and therefore sandwiches. Calzones, closed like a burrito, sandwich. Ravioli, just a smaller calzone, sandwich. Chicken nuggets, the breading is our carb, enclosed like the Monte Cristo, sandwich. Pies, well, depending on if it's an open top or not, it's an open face or a closed face sandwich. Casseroles follow the same logic. At this point, it seems like everything that isn't a soup or a salad can be called a sandwich. Unless. Allow me now then to introduce you to competition cooking show's favorite new word. Deconstructed. If you watch enough Chopped or Cutthroat Kitchen, I'm sure you've heard this term before. Usually a chef runs out of time to complete their dish, so they just throw food on a plate and call it a deconstructed this and that. If our most esteemed chefs are using the term, why can't we? It is, after all, a legitimate cooking term. So let's take a look at some deconstructed sandwiches. The term deconstructed in cooking means to figuratively, not literally, boil a food down to its basic elements and maybe alter them a little bit, but in the end you're plating them with some assembly required in your mouth.
I like to make it in my mouth. It tastes better.
And while you may be like me and do not agree with this style of food, it is still a recognized and valid form for food. Let's say, for instance, that we deconstruct a basic sandwich composed of 2 bread slices, iceberg lettuce, red onions, tomato, and ham. Now, suppose we take all of these items and put them in a bowl. Maybe we could cut up the bread into little smaller pieces to make it fit better, and looks like a salad, doesn't it? This deconstructed sandwich is indistinguishable from a salad. Therefore, it can be said that salads are just deconstructed sandwiches. They don't even need to have croutons, as we discussed earlier, the bread isn't essential, and the meat isn't either, as is the case with vegetarian sandwiches. Okay, well, what about soups? Aren't they feeling left out? Some sandwiches, such as the French dip, may include a sauce for dipping. In the case of the French dip, it is the drippings from the meat while it's cooked. Let's imagine, instead of serving the sauce on the side, we wanted to smother the sandwich in it. Well, now the sandwich is all soggy and gross, so we move it to a bowl. At this point, the sandwich is looking an awful lot like soup. If we alter the bread in the form of a bread bowl, then it becomes much more clear to see all of the properties of a sandwich being represented. If we remove the bread entirely, it's practically a pot roast, which is all a French dip is anyways, it's just a pot roast between bread. Since sandwiches don't require bread, a pot roast therefore is a sandwich. This idea can be expanded on to include other soups. Chicken noodle soup? Well, that might as well just be a deconstructed chicken sandwich with broth dip. At this point, we can consider ourselves to be enlightened sandwich thinkers. There will be those who do not agree with us. They'll call us radicals, anarchists, they'll call us crazy. But as I've just demonstrated, it's possible to have logical reasoning for this way of thinking. These people, they don't know that they're wrong, just as you might not have before watching this. We can't get angry or frustrated when justifying ourselves. In the final portion of this video, I will be showing and responding to several mainstream media articles on sandwich theory and equipping you with the knowledge on how to confront these heretics. Our first piece comes from The Atlantic with a dangerously heathenist title. It's not a sandwich. This really gets my blood boiling, but we have to remember to stay calm and enlighten the ignorant. In this article, the author lays out a set of 4 points a food must meet to be considered a sandwich. Let's discuss this so-called sandwich index, point by point. The first point asserts that to qualify as a sandwich, a given food product must structurally consist of 2 exterior pieces that are either separate or mostly separate. This point immediately invalidates all open-faced sandwiches, and the author is even aware of this. Later on in the article, they comment on this fact, suggesting that they aren't sandwiches at all. This right here is enough to invalidate their entire argument. We cannot expect to have a reasonable, logical debate with a group of people that refuses to accept the validity of such a basic sandwich type. But we will move on. Point 2 states that these pieces must be primarily carbohydrate-based, so made of bread or bread-like products. This is a more reasonable point, however it does forget about the unwhiches. This does, however, support many of the sandwiches we previously discussed, such as the taco, the burrito, Pop-Tart, ice cream sandwiches, and sandwich cookies. Point 3 says the whole assemblage must have a primarily horizontal orientation, so sitting flush with the plate rather than perpendicular to it. This concept is just ridiculous to begin with. The orientation of a food depends on perspective, and perspective can be easily changed. If the hot dog isn't a sandwich because the buns go vertically, then we can simply rotate the sandwich 90 degrees and fix the problem. The fourth and final point states that the whole assemblage must be fundamentally portable. I'm not too sure I understand what they mean by this point, but my best guess is that it's suggesting that sandwiches must be held in one hand without the use of a plate or a bowl. In that case, I'd like to see the author try to eat a 3-foot-long sub with one hand. In my opinion, when we're talking about sandwiches, size doesn't matter. Some sandwiches are too big or have too many components to be entirely portable, and this is okay. I wouldn't want to walk around a park trying to eat a sloppy joe, but that doesn't make it not a sandwich. Clearly, this argument is trying to entirely redefine what a sandwich is to fit their twisted agenda instead of using already known and existing sandwich precedent and applying it to the hot dog. This is most evident when they entirely discredit the existence of the open-faced sandwiches with no shame. The second article we are discussing comes from the Washington Post. They bring an interesting take on sandwich theory while still being wrong. In their article, they describe what they refer to as the cube rule of food. This divides foods into 6 categories based on the location of the starch in reference to the filling. In diagram 1, we can see that the starch is on the bottom with the fillings on top. This is once again based in the refusal to accept the open-faced sandwich as a sandwich. The second diagram displays a typical sandwich, and it does label it as a sandwich. This is acceptable. In the third diagram, we can see 3 sides are covered by the starch, and they call this a taco. This flies in the face of submarine sandwiches, and it's the second time that they've shown that they're willing to redefine an integral part of sandwich theory just to fit their agenda. The fourth diagram shows the starch encapsulating 4 sides of the filling, and it labels this as sushi. But my question is it still not being sandwiched by the outside? Why can't sushi be considered a sandwich? The fact is that it is a sandwich, similar to our burrito argument. In the fifth diagram, we see that all but one side is enclosed, and it labels this as a soup or a salad with a bread bowl. Now, we've already discussed soups and salads and why they're sandwiches, and when you add the bread bowl to the equation, it's pretty clearly just another form of the sandwich. The final diagram shows all 6 sides being enclosed and labels these foods as calzones. But the problem is, once again, the calzone is a sandwich. While this is a fun exercise, the article is really only defining subcategories of sandwiches. Anything that falls under category 1 is an open-faced sandwich, number 2 is a closed sandwich, 3 is a taco, which is a sandwich, 4 is sushi, which is a sandwich, 5 is a soup or a salad, once again, a sandwich, and 6 is a calzone. Sandwich. This article works fine for identifying subcategories of sandwiches, but that was not the intention of the article. Now, you may have noticed that I didn't bring up the National Hot Dog and Sausage Council in our arguments. This is partially because I genuinely believe them to be satire and not taking their title seriously. Go ahead and look at their website, have an explore if you want to laugh, but these people should by no means be considered leading experts in the fields. Their About page lists no credentials and in fact states that they're funded by hot dog and sausage corporations. These guys could literally just be 3 raccoons in a trench coat. Nevertheless, I will discuss one of their articles on the topic of hot dog sandwiches and point out why this council cannot be taken seriously. The article in question comes from 2015, when they first published their standing in the hot dog sandwich debate. In it, they argue you would be disrespecting the hot dog to call it just a sandwich, but this irks me. Firstly, sandwiches have such a wide variety and versatility that to be called a sandwich is not an insult. Second, it would in fact be wrong to call a hot dog just a sandwich, which is why no one would claim such a thing. A hot dog is a type of sandwich, but so is a pizza. I would not call a pizza just a sandwich, but it is still a type of sandwich. They then go on to say that although it was originally called a hot dog sandwich, we no longer use that full title in today's world, and therefore it must not be a sandwich. This is a crazy idea. We shorten the names of things all the time. It's human nature. The hamburger was called a hamburger sandwich. We dropped the sandwich from that name. Does that mean the hamburger is no longer a sandwich? Of course not. The last point that they make is to reference the same USDA policy book that we already discussed and debunked in our reasoning earlier. Now, you are fully equipped with the knowledge and the skills required to accept the truth of sandwich theory. Never again will you have to sit there and listen to the sandwich heresy that is abundant in today's society. Now you can fight back. If you've come this far and you still hold on to your archaic way of thinking about sandwiches, I'm afraid there just might not be hope for you. I hope everyone who's watched this has become enlightened at the very least to the reality of the hot dog sandwich. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.